been working with, Rebecca and Paul for quite a few years now. So it's a delight to be here and to meet Federico.
Fedi, that's a good tie-in. Why don't you go next?
Thank you, Rebecca. Hey, everybody. I lead product for AWS Fabric. It's a new service that connects SaaS applications together. I've been in the technology space for over a decade now. It's pretty exciting to explore the world of technology and collaboration together with Paul, Bob, and Rebecca.
And Paul, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Paul Leonardi. I'm a professor and author, consultant. I study technology's role in changing organizations, hopefully for the better. A lot of times it's not for the better, and so we try to figure out how to actually make it work better.
Wonderful. And I think we started just a tad bit late. So for anyone who didn't catch the beginning, welcome to Work Innovators Live. I'm Rebecca Hines. I lead the Work Innovation Lab at Asana. Asana is a leading AI work management platform that helps teams work smarter together by connecting strategy and goals all the way to execution. And then the Work Innovation Lab is our internal think tank. We conduct research with leading experts on the future of work. So today we're unpacking a problem that all of us are really passionate about. It's a problem that we and others call technology overload. And consistently, we see it's one of the biggest challenges that businesses face today. They're using too many disconnected, dysfunctional, and duplicative technologies. It's highly inefficient, and it's also exhausting. And as Paul says, workers are digitally exhausted by using too many broken collaboration tools that silo teams and also drain them. So Bob, Fedi, Paul, help us understand this problem. What's driving this? Maybe what do you think is the biggest driver of this technology overload and technology exhaustion today? Bob, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so thanks, Rebecca. So let's start with the basic that we're all humans. And we humans, when we face a problem, there's a lot of research on this, especially I would show you the book. And my friend Leidy Klotz wrote the book Subtract. So we humans, when we face a problem, our natural tendency is to add more complexity. Whether it's fixing a university, fixing a Lego model, planning a trip, or adding to our tech stack. So that if I would do a headline, and we talk about all sorts of reasons in the Friction Project, but I would start with the fact that we human beings, unless we stop ourselves, when we face a problem, we're going to just keep adding stuff to it to make it more complex.
And this is a problem, as you said, not specific to technology at all. It's this innate human tendency for addition.
It's how we're made.
Fedi, how about you? What do you think is the number one driver that we see cause this problem, technology overload, technology exhaustion?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I think it builds on Bob's really. Like in the past decade, we've seen a Cambrian explosion of SaaS applications adoptions across companies and the tech stack. And the reality is that the premise of one app or one suite to rule them all, it's fundamentally flawed. We're seeing over 40% of companies that are using suites tend to complement those with purpose-built SaaS apps. But the reality then is that individuals, they need to battle with tasks and content that span multiple apps. And so that really adds to that friction.
Mm-hmm. And I think what we saw, the tendency is definitely an innate one we see with collaboration technologies. It was definitely exacerbated during the pandemic, where often businesses look to collaboration technologies as this crutch for the in-person interaction. And once we lost the in-person interaction, they started to overinvest in these collaboration technologies, which definitely contributed to the problem. Paul, what about you? Any other drivers that you see contributing to this?
Yeah, there's so many. Let me just focus on one area that I think is really important, and that's that we have too many ways to access too much information at too many different times. And we're just overloaded and overwhelmed by not just the content that we have exposure to and that we can access, but all the means by which we can access them. And there's a lot of really great research that shows that when we're doing the switching across different areas or different technologies or different domains, that we get mentally exhausted. And there's some good science to show why that is, but emotionally exhausted as well. I've been doing a lot of research on this topic lately, and there's kind of three big areas, right, that I see these switches happen that are really exhausting. And the first is between tools. And so it's just tough to learn how to use a different tool. This is my third call this morning, and this is my third different video platform that I've been. And every single one of them requires me to find a new button and, where's record and how do I adjust my mic? And that seems trivial, but when you do that all day long, that's exhausting and it wears you out. And so that's just switching across tools, but we're also switching across information inputs, right? We're working on a report, and then we're going on a call, and then we're going to a meeting, and then we're doing some in-depth work. And then in the middle of it, we switch domains. Our family calls us, right? My kid's school calls and says, oh, your daughter's not feeling well. And then I got to deal with that. And so all that switching just wears us out, even though these tools provide us access to so much great information at our fingertips.
Mm-hmm. And I think we often don't recognize the cost of that switching. And I think all of us are familiar with the great research from Gloria Mark just on how exhausting that switching cost is in terms of the time and the effort. And she's done great research to show that if we become distracted as we context switch from app to app to app, it can take us more than 20 minutes to return back to our original task. And it's an enormous cost that we don't often recognize as we're going through our day-to-day.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, multiple drivers of this pervasive problem that we see in organizations. Let's talk a little bit about the solution. And all four of us share the common experience of partnering on part of the solution last year. We partnered on an experiment that we called the Collaboration Cleanse. We essentially had a group of Amazon employees and a group of Asana employees stop using a certain number of their technologies for 2 weeks, their collaboration technologies. So they were asked to stop using these technologies. They needed to log every time they deviated from their approved tech stack. And we saw some interesting results. And when we published these results, we framed it in terms of we saw good news, but we also saw bad news. The good news is we saw that most participants did feel like they could eliminate one or more technologies from their tech stack after the experiment. So they did the technology audit. They recognized that some technologies that they were using as a core part of their day-to-day were no longer useful for them. They were able to eliminate those. The bad news was we measured what Paul calls digital exhaustion. So how exhausting are the technologies that you use every day at work? And we actually saw that digital exhaustion increased throughout the experiment. Why don't we talk a little bit about why we saw this? Why did we see this increase in digital exhaustion?
So is it my turn?
You want to go, Bob?
So, real briefly, my colleagues know more about this than I do, but real briefly, the reason we saw an increase from what I can tell is just by asking people to list all of the different tools they use. They realized how many tools they use and also how powerless they were to get rid of many of those tools because they were so interdependent with other people. And I'll leave it to some of my colleagues to go onto it. But we started out the article, early drafts of the article, talking about learned helplessness because we made people aware of, oh my goodness, all these people put tools on us and we don't have the power to stop them. And I like Paul's example this morning because I'm the same as Paul. I think I've used 7 or 8 tools that people have imposed on me. And I'm not mad at them, but it's just life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that point about not having the autonomy and the freedom to choose how you work is really tough because, with just those video conferencing examples that we talked about before, you get really comfortable using one tool and then you're asked to use another one and a different one. And you sure think, boy, my life would be so much better if I could just eliminate 1 or 2 of these. But you recognize how much interdependence you have with everyone else who's on a tool that you need to be on to interact with them and access the data that they're talking about. And just that feeling is overwhelming, not to mention the actual overwhelm of using all the different tools. Mm-hmm. And so surfacing that to people in our study was really fascinating because it did drive me to recognize, I'm actually pretty worn out and I don't feel like I can do much about it.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting to see how a lot of it span out from desire to do good in a way, like individual trying to adopt a tool for the purpose, I'm going to improve the productivity of my work group. But then the reality is that the nature of work is cross-functional, and all of a sudden we have 5 different video conferencing tools. And so there is this bottoms-up driven adoption, and then from the top, the really lack of well, that's where I think, Bob, you talk about good friction, right? And so the idea of having this thoughtful guidance on SaaS management really coming from the top can actually be helpful.
It's a little bit of a modern day tragedy of the commons in the sense of, you have individual teams investing in their own set of technologies in silos from the rest of the organization. They're not talking to each other, they're not strategizing with one another, and you get these disconnected tech stacks. Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about what you call the credit card effect and how that exacerbates
no credit card?
Yeah. So, and it actually dovetails nicely with what Fede was saying, because I think what we see often is there's a lot of leaders in companies that are really trying to operate from a good place, and they're saying, things aren't working on my team. We're not keeping track of our projects in the right way. People are feeling overwhelmed. And we're conditioned as modern humans to look to technology as a solution to those problems. And so, like I've seen countless numbers of, managers and companies say, well, I'm just going to adopt Slack for my team, or I'm going to adopt, whatever product it is, right, that's going to help with this communication challenge that we're having, or make it easier. And what's cool and sort of sneaky at the same time is, so many of these SaaS companies kind of design the price points of their products so that any manager across the company can just charge it on their credit card without having to get approval. And what that means is that you see an uprising of applications all across the company for people that are trying to do good. But what it means is now I got to learn a new tool. And then I'm trying to talk to this team and I'm trying to see where they are with their project, but they're only on this other platform. So now I got to get on this platform so I can learn what they're doing. And the problem exacerbates. It starts from a place of, I want to help my team, but it can quickly grow out of control without the right kind of constraints in place that make sure that not everybody can just adopt a new tool whenever they want to.
So let me, jet ski behind Paul a little bit, just as a general rule. I hate to say this, I'm an old organizational theorist. When I started out in organizational theory, I thought everybody should be able to do whatever they wanted, and organizations should be decentralized as possible and have no rules. And this might be sad, but 2 of our kind of solutions to these and many other problems are centralization of authority and more rules and constraints. So I almost hate to say it. My 30-year-old self would be ashamed of me advocating this, but maybe my colleagues have other solutions. But there's a lot of things in organizations. Sometimes they just get too decentralized and not enough rules.
Yeah, and Bob, I think you of 30 years ago also experienced a world of you could use a different technology, but it might just affect you.
Yes.
And now every tool that we use pulls other people into its orbit. And that creates all kinds of demands, because not only are we pulling others into our orbit, we're being pulled into their orbits also. And things that we choose for ourselves now have huge implications for other people.
Yeah,
and especially when we think about the nature of cross-functional work, one of our good friends, Rob Cross, has done great research on how collaboration within companies has ballooned. It's become more complex. It's become more cross-functional, and we're not in the world of work that we were decades ago. And it's become much more cross-functional, such that we need that standardization. We need that centralized technology stack.
Yeah. So just a comment, it is amazing how much organizations vary in encouraging and enabling decentralization. So one of my friends, Kim Scott, who wrote Radical Candor, some of you may know her, she went from working at Google, where everybody is supposed to collaborate with everybody else, to Apple, which is the most secretive, isolated company in the world. You're not allowed to talk to people outside of your team. And she said, I went from getting a couple hundred emails a day to 3 or 4. And I don't know how we've got, an Amazon representative here. I don't know how it is in other places, but the difference between those 2 numbers to me suggests that it's a lot different in different organizations. I don't think that Kim was experiencing digital exhaustion at Apple. Maybe other problems, but not digital exhaustion.
And I think one of the other interesting findings from the research was, integrations, and how as people were pulling back on the sheer number of tools they were using, they were leveraging integrations more and more. And Fedi, you think about this all day long. Can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of integrations and how that might be a solution to some of these problems?
Yeah, I think it's in the quest, if you will, for high productivity and ultimate collaboration. We've seen this growing number of apps that has created redundant tools across department, has created these data silos, and ultimately, at the end of the day, to execute and to stay and get along our day and respond to the 200 emails and get through our video calls, the end of it all anchors on the data. The more apps you have, the more silos you create, the more your data is dispersed. I think we all tend to frown upon trying to remember where was that message, right? Where was my 1099 when filing taxes? Like the whole point of trying to locate information just to go about your day, people tend to spend over an hour of every single day battling with the tedious exercise of searching. And even more so now, especially in the foundation like of effective AI implementation really requires us to put data integrity first. And unfortunately, we've seen that the sprawling technology stacks has really compromised this, which is really a big challenge for IT leaders. It is also a challenge for employees that tend to go about their day. And that's where integrations can really help, especially if they're seamless to the individual, where they can enable to bring the data where you need it the most in the software and the tools, in the technology that you tend to spend most of your day on, as to reduce what Paul was referring to earlier, this constant toggling and switching from app to app to app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, to add some numbers to what Fede was saying, if we go back to the study that we all did together, we found that people were spending roughly an hour, I think 57 minutes a day, switching between software applications. And that wasn't even the most surprising finding to me. The most surprising finding was that they were spending half an hour a day deciding what applications to use, right? And just think about that. I mean, if you're switching applications, 12, you're switching so much, and you have to also decide what you're doing, that's a real cognitive cost. And to the extent that you have integrations that reduce the decision fatigue for you, that's huge. And also the controls in place within your organization that limit the amount of deciding that you actually have to do.
Mm-hmm. And it multiplies. It multiplies across every person on your team, every employee in your company. And it's a huge, massive cost. And what I think is so interesting about our study is there was that desire to change. There was a recognition of what work to do in which technology and how to optimize the tech stack, but a recognition that the employees alone couldn't drive the change. It really required the leaders within the company to take a stand and implement from top down some of this strategy. So how do leaders go about doing this? Any recommendations for leaders to bring their organization to a better path forward in terms of minimizing this digital exhaustion and tech overload?
Well, my general perspective on this, and Paul and Fedi have a different point of view, I think, but my general perspective on this, and this comes from the research on our tendency to add, is if you actually prime human beings and say, your job is subtraction, and you are accountable for doing it. So it's two things. It's awareness and then holding them accountable instead of blaming everybody else for the problem. To me, that's how it starts. And I'll just tell a short story and then I'll hand it off. So I was talking to a group of, well, I won't name the company. It was not Amazon or Asana, of 400 vice presidents. And we did a survey of their biggest sources of overload. Their biggest source of overload was Slack messages. Too long, too many, irrelevant. My host interrupted in the middle of it. And she said, this is really interesting because you're blaming other people. Why don't you take a look in the mirror? You're our 400 vice presidents. You are the ones who are sending too many Slack messages, ones that are too long and ones that are irrelevant. And I'm glad I didn't have to say that. But I thought that yes, there's interdependence, but we all have what we call it in our book a cone of friction. We all have the opportunities to make things harder or easier on people. So that's where I would start.
Mm-hmm. And regardless of where you are in the organization, definitely leaders are critical, and change, meaningful change when it comes to technology can't happen without them, but everyone does have a role to play for sure.
Yeah. And one of the problems with friction fixing in general is that it tends to be an orphan problem that people blame other people on. But I always think it's good to start looking in the mirror.
Yeah, good point, Bob.
Paul, Freddy, any other advice for leaders as they go about combating some of this tech overload today?
I think my perspective is that we have almost a responsibility to try and invent a way to keep employees and folks in their flow of work. I think we ought to create an environment where what matters to users, to employees, is surfaced to them when they need it, where they need it, with the full context of what they're doing, irrespective of which tool or technology they're interacting with. And I think there is a part of that is executed through the right governance and controls, avoiding, managing, controlling the sprawl of the credit card problems, right? The number of apps being deployed, implementing good friction. But there is also an element of, from a technology side, we all have a responsibility to try and think through how do we reflect on the fact that the nature of work is cross-functional in nature, and with all these purpose-built SaaS applications that are best at what they do, and it's very specific, we need to find a way to connect them all together seamlessly, so that the user doesn't have even to worry about the fact that now Slack doesn't talk to this other app, like in Bob's example.
Yeah, technology design paired with the human intervention is very powerful. Paul, anything to add?
Sure, I'll offer two ideas, one more conventional perhaps than the other. The first is that, there's a lot of really old but very well replicated research, right? That shows that if, different kinds of tools are good for different things, and they afford certain kinds of behaviors and they constrain our abilities to do others. And we have completely lost sight of that in most of our companies. That we think, we just need to communicate something quickly to somebody, and we shoot them a direct message. And it turns out it was a really complex problem that is open to lots of interpretation. And that is just not the right tool to resolve that ambiguity. It's not the right tool to figure out what someone needs and help them. Yet we mismatch our sort of communication needs or our data needs with tools all the time. And it creates lots of back and forth. And, I've got an example from a company I worked with recently where, one of the senior leaders was really frustrated about something, communicated it in an email to someone. That person didn't understand why the senior leader was so frustrated. There were like 30 emails that went back and forth, and they were making all kinds of inferences about each other's motives and why they were mad and why they were upset. And then they actually got together to talk for like 5 minutes and resolve the entire thing, right? But think of all the extra work that we did and all those other emails and all the emotional drama that went along with trying to decode what was happening. That's all the stuff that leads to exhaustion. So we need to be better about understanding what tools to use for what purposes. And I think leaders sort of owe it to their companies to do a service to help make that more explicit. That at our company, when you want to communicate this kind of message or when you want to send this kind of information to someone, this is how you do it. And that eases up the worry about having to decide amongst all those other things. So that's kind of number one. Number two is we talk about our technology entirely too much. And I think we'll talk about AI, I know, in a minute, but boy, we are going off the deep end, I think, in most companies about how much we talk about tools like AI and how it's going to change work and what's going to change jobs and who's going to get eliminated and what's going to get automated. And that creates real anxiety for people. And when we talk about how we don't have the right tool for this, or we need to get on this application, or we need to use ChatGPT for this, folks are concerned and worried, and that ratchets up, I think, just our stress level. And I mean, we need to do a better job, and leaders in particular need to do a better job of not beating the drum on every technology that comes along, not freaking people out, and having more controlled discourse and more controlled discussion about our tools. Of course, the media doesn't help, but I think we just talk about our technology too much, and it gets under our skin.
It's so important. So let's talk a little bit about AI, because as you hinted at, Paul, I think what I'm seeing is when organizations are adopting and implementing AI well, it is a seamless part of the workflow. It's not something new. It's not another technology. It's seamlessly integrated into the ways in which they already work. So let's talk about whether AI can make this problem better. Is it likely to make it worse? How do you see the role of AI playing into this problem of technology overload?
Is it my turn? Well, I'll go first. So my reaction to this is the word seamless makes me nervous, because, to be honest, I know you people in companies use this term, but nothing in life is seamless. I always start with the assumption it's messy, and maybe people in companies like yours can make it less bad. So that's, I'm not for, I wish it was seamless. I just want less pain. In terms of Chat GPT, or other related tools, it's just like anything else as human beings. If we say we're going to use it for subtraction and be explicit, if you tell it to subtract, it subtracts. And there was a great New England Journal of Medicine article published by a bunch of folks who did work with Lifespan, which is the largest healthcare provider in the state of Rhode Island. And they fed in their surgical consent form, and they said, make it shorter and more readable. And it came out shorter and more readable. And it's now being used by 35,000 people a year. So it actually is possible, but it's just like any other tool. And the three of you know much more about tools than I do. You can use a hammer to break a window or to pound down a nail. You kind of make a decision what you're going to use it for. So that's my perspective. But I think all of you know more about AI than I do in particular.
I don't know. I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Like with AI, generative AI in particular, there is the paradox of collaboration is even stronger. Generative AI can help create meaningful content. It can help the creative process, can help draft emails and emails faster, messages faster. And then what happens is that this actually is going to foster even more kind of this notification overload, because now instead of 200 emails a day, you're getting 400 emails a day. Instead of 10 papers to review, you're getting 20 papers to review. And so all these emails and messages coming in faster, because it's also much easier to get content generated now across the 10 different apps that I need to use to go about my day. The risk of burnout is actually greater than ever before. And so being thoughtful about that subtraction mindset, even in this renaissance of AI with the transformer model, generative AI and all it can do to help simplify our lives, it's a real risk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. My biggest fear is that we are going to be using AI across all of our applications to create more data points that we need to digest, more communications that we need to read. I saw a funny meme the other day. It was like, oh, you spent all this, you took your 3 bullet points and used ChatGPT to convert it into 3 paragraphs and sent it to me in an email. And I converted those 3 paragraphs down to 3 bullet points that I could read, right? Like, that's what we want not to happen, for sure. But I think it's a real concern. Where I think that AI could be the most useful, though, is getting us the right information at the right time without having to incur all those switching costs. Mm-hmm. So, rather than me have to get out of the application I'm working in to go find some information somewhere else, if AI can help figure out, based on what I'm working on, here are 5 different things that you have access to that could help you with that, and push that to me, that puts it into my flow of work in a way that allows me to sort of stay in the same mental space, not have to switch across domains or applications or whatever. And that's where I think real value could be created.
Mm-hmm. And Fedi, you alluded to it earlier, the importance of the underlying data. And the reason we can potentially do that is because we're investing in technologies that do connect our data sources.
That's right. And I think, again, collaboration does happen cross-functional. These data is across all these different apps. And if we can use AI to bring these experiences, the context and the content that all these set of apps have about Federico, then you have a shot at keeping users in their flow of work and without the nagging of toggling of apps that we all experience today. And in that way, AI is going to help us level up our output, removing that negative friction.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that was a perfect note to end on, Fedi. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Bob, Fedi, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. To everyone who joined us live, thank you. I learned a lot. I hope you did as well. You can check out our research at workinnovationlab.com. And we're really looking forward to seeing you on the next LinkedIn Live.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Boom. We're done.